Shut up, class. We're talking about art.
Thank you for coming out in this kind of snowy, weird weather. And thank you, Virginia Festival of the Book, for including this in their programming. I'm so happy to Artner with them, because normally I go to book festivals in other places, so it's nice to stick close to home, especially when there's weird weather. So my name is Gulledge, and I am a graphic novelist. So I have 2 young adult graphic novels out, one which is set here in Charlottesville and is a musical, and then Page by Page, which is set in Brooklyn, where I moved after Charlottesville to go break into where the books live. And my style as a cartoonist is sort of half in reality and half in my characters' heads. This talk, I'm actually not going to talk very much about comics, because normally I talk about comics. But this talk is sort of another side of my personality. Because my ideas start with art and illustration, and then they lead to graphic novels. So this is an opportunity for me to sort of geek out on things I normally don't get to geek out about. And I also just published a book called Sketchbook Dares. And there's also a rainbow theme, because there's a lot of rainbows happening this year. I think I stopped being so depressed. Yes, color came back. And it's an interactive sketchbook, so it's full of different drawing activities, sort of different drawing lessons, really, based on things that I like to do in my sketchbook and things that I've done with students, and also things I just sort of made up for this book and I thought sounded really fun. So I'm sort of, I don't know, I've always struggled as a creative as being a little all over the place and doing too many different things. And I feel like a lot of us are told that. Working on this talk has actually been really interesting for me to look at my own story and my own journey to see that a lot of the choices that I made that seemed really crazy at the time, didn't make sense, actually had a logic to it. Another thing I forgot to point out is the other format I like to publish in is sort of more like my natural style, which is a single picture and a caption, which back in the day publishers hated, but now it's sort of Instagram. So I guess we're always ahead of the need, because folks are like, we hate this, we want sequential. So my ideas, this is how they come out, and I feel like a lot of our ideas, they sort of fit into different boxes and take different shapes. So mine are still evolving and growing and whatnot. But the art that you see on the walls here, this is all stuff that I made just for myself as my own therapy. And then doing things in more like a published form, this is more of sort of the polished version, like, oh, this is, I know what I'm doing. But I like to keep the personal art, I make it for me because then I'm doing something that really needs to come out, and it's not to make money, and it's not for an audience, it's just because it's my therapy. Because I feel like that when I make art from an authentic place, that's when it reveals truth to me. A lot of times I'll draw something, I don't know what it's telling me quite totally until later. So while working on assembling this show, I did the process that I do with a lot of my comic books, where I look at the images, what am I telling myself? And it's like a puzzle. Because the ideas come all out of order, and there's multiple stories. So you gotta first pick a theme, and then pick out the pictures that relate to that, and then what's my story? So with this body of work, when I laid it out, I realized that, oh, wait, this is telling the story of the return trip of the hero's journey. And I actually made a little handout over here. Can you tell that I used to be a teacher? And of course I made a big giant handout. Big giant handout. I'm just going to put that there. I'm just going to point to it. It's sort of yeah, that works. Because I don't know about you guys, but I had trouble when I was young figuring out how to grow up. And I honestly think that the world is struggling with how to grow up right now. I think that there's a lot of systems of the problems are really symptoms of this sort of struggling with how to go from adolescence to adulthood. And as a young adult author, I can point out the irony in this because so many people in young adult, we are obsessed with that transition of like, how do you become who you want to be? And how do you choose your path? And what's the right way to go? And I feel like that the path that we're normally given, the path, this is what I drew as like the usual path, which I also think looks like a conveyor belt, if you look at the side. So the path we're normally given is you graduate high school, graduate college, you start a professional career, buy a car, buy a house, get married, have kids, work for 40 years, then you retire, and then you pursue your passion. And I don't know about you guys, but when I was young, because I am the daughter of a civil servant and a Tupperware saleswoman, so my role models, it was very much stability. And so this was like, what was presented to me, and it always felt weird to me, but I was such a little people pleaser that I didn't think that I had any place to question this as what you're supposed to do, because the grown-ups know what they're doing, right? Speaking of growing up. And also, I just thought, what's the point of waiting all this way to discover your passion? Because like my grandmother was the strongest artistic influence in my life, and she didn't start painting until she was retired. And I feel like that's the common story. And she just she's a better painter than me. And seeing that and thinking like, what if she did that when she was younger? Like, what if we cut out some of this middle part and just like skip ahead to the doing your passion? Because it just seems like a lot of bullshit. And also I could tell that it didn't make people happy. But a lot of people that tell you to do it, I don't know, just to like join me, yes, you also need to owe lots of money for your car and whatnot. But I was sort of like, I'm not sure. I did walk the path for a while. Oh wait, I wrote myself notes. Of course, I'm totally not looking at them. I knew this would happen. I would just go off script. So I hopped off the path probably it was after I established myself as a art teacher. So I got my master's degree in art education. I was the first graduate from the JMU Art Ed program. I was like their golden girl. Everything was going according to plan. But then when I was teaching, I was just in therapy the whole time, trying to figure out why I wasn't happy with all the things that I thought I wanted. And that was when I before I get into storytelling mode, first let me introduce what path I actually started walking, which was the hero's journey, which is also on your handouts. And so, a little bit about the hero's journey, because yes, I'm teaching information. It's a monomyth made famous by mythologist Joseph Campbell. Raise your hand if you're already familiar with the hero's journey. Okay. Some people. I find that a lot of millennials don't know, because I feel like that Joseph Campbell was super cool, more in like 70s, 80s, Star Wars era. And it's basically a story structure pattern that's prevalent in myths and stories in cultures around the world. And it features the hero protagonist. So if you're not familiar with it, it normally features your hero going off into, sort of the unknown world, where they go on sort of a quest, and they are assisted by helpers and face trials, and they're somehow transformed, and then they return to their, return to the Shire, with the things that they experienced on their journey. And for me, I'm talking about this not because I'm an expert on Joseph Campbell, because I am not. I think I read Hero with a Million Faces or whatnot, forever ago. But I'm speaking to it because I'm a storyteller. And I think that this is a common pattern in stories, because storytellers, we are telling ourselves what to do. Not just because it's a thing on paper, because obviously I didn't go out and, kill dragons or whatnot. It's a metaphor for the inward journey that is much more difficult to talk about, but that's why we use metaphors and archetypes. And I definitely speak archetype and metaphor, and I find that a lot of times they are teaching me something, even if I'm not sure why I'm drawing, why am I obsessed with these glaciers? I don't know. But then later, I'm like, oh, it's a symbol. You know, how in one moment in time, things don't seem like they're changing, but over the course of time, they can carve out mountain chains. And so for me, I think that story is the ultimate way that we convey information, especially after figuring out how to teach more in the wild. When I would work with young people, the only things they would remember were the stories that I told them. And the data, it doesn't sink in, but as Brene Brown says, stories are data with a soul. And so if you turn the data into, if you give it soul and turn it into a story, that's the best way to teach. So why are storytellers repeating the hero's journey with everything from Lord of the Rings to Harry Potter to Homer's Odyssey? And it's because they're showing us another path, because they know this path, a linear path, doesn't work. We need to think more cyclically as creative people, because the wisdom we need, it's not new wisdom, it's kind of old wisdom. And it's teaching us really to be the heroes of our own stories. And of course, normally creative people, we're sort of, struggling with, mental illness or finances, or, we're vulnerable people. So the idea of us as heroes can sound a little like, not us little shy hobbitses. But I think that the gifts that we need right now come from those who are the most vulnerable. Like, they have the gifts that we need. And so now that I've sort of been able to see enough that, oh, this is my journey, and I'm, getting myself back to reality, I instantly want to reach back and help the next group with their journey, because really everyone's on a journey, and we can't compare, when people are on their journey, because I feel like that there's a lot of compare, despair, like, how old were you when you figured that out? Because I was thinking of my friend Nancy, who I met in New York, who she raised 4 kids in Texas, and I met her when we worked on Macy's Christmas windows, and she was in her 50s, and after she raised these kids, she ended up, you know what, I want to go to New York and be like, do you see any pants? She saw the Macy's windows, she was like, I'm going to paint those. And so she sold her house and moved to New York, and then she was there, and her whole life got turned upside down, and she just started completely over. And I always thought, it's never too late, Laura Lee. Just think about Nancy Ray. And so my journey, it probably would take a different shape than yours, but I hope that you can, maybe find some relation to the different archetypes of the story to maybe make you feel like that you're not alone, or get some insight or some comfort. Because I think that none of us think that we're living a great story or our life as a story, because we're too busy living it. I mean, kids are a great example, because a kid, every day they see themselves in the mirror, they don't see how much they're growing. But if you only see them once a year, you're like, oh man, you're like, and they're like, what, I don't know. None of us think that we are living a story, because in the day-to-day it just feels like chaos. But slowly over time, our choices are carving our path. So this is an opportunity I'll tell you, sort of about what the journey looked like for me through all these stages, and it's a lot of stages, so I'm going to try to go through it pretty quickly. Hopefully maybe you'll discover that you are also a hero in training. So the first, let's see, okay, cool. Stuff. Because at the end I want to make sure we have time for some questions, and maybe time for people to talk if they want to share a little about their journey. And if you stick around until the very end, I'm going to invite people to take part in a little glitter caper, because I feel like if we talk about something, get all like riled up, then we gotta, put that energy into something. So yes, there's some, it's like, okay. So the hero's journey begins, of course, in the boring, ordinary world, where the hero's in the mundane situation of normality. And for me, that was growing up in Northern Virginia with, very normal family. And I was just, an average kid with a blonde with lazy eye glasses who liked drug Garfield. And I was so shy that my teachers were like, is everything okay at home? and I cried a lot, so I was a crybaby, and I had very low frustration factor, which is why I just focused on Garfield, and I couldn't know anything else. And really, I never thought that I had anything to offer. I was just like trying to be invisible. So that was me when I was young. Oh, let me brought some props. Because, props are fun. So then, the call to adventure. I feel like it's the bell that cannot be unheard. If you hear the call to the quest, it will forever echo in your head. You can try to bury it with work or with whatever obsessions you have, but it is still there. It's like this unanswered question. So for me, the call to adventure was when when I was young, people always say when you draw when you're young, you're going to be a famous artist one day. Kids always say that. My reaction was always, I don't want to be a famous artist because they're all crazy. Ha ha ha. That was my reaction. And really, I didn't want to be an artist because I didn't see how you do it. And when our superpower as creative people is our vision. If we can see the steps to do something, we can make it happen. But if we can't see it, it is literally impossible. And so my call to adventure was when I was in middle school, and I started really getting into, of course, Disney animation, like middle school girls do. But really, Beauty and the Beast came out when I was 12, and I had a book that was all about how they made it, and that's how I actually learned how to do character design and storyboarding. Everything was from this book, and that's so I could see wait, maybe this is how I can be an artist because it's like a real job. That doesn't seem crazy at all. It seems like a real job. I could totally see myself doing that because the inside of my head was moving pictures. This will be great. But then we come to 3, the refusal of the call. So the following year, and I was 13 or 14, my family went to Disney World on vacation, and we visited the animation department, and my parents being, trying to understand their weird little, permed-haired, Sally Jesse Raphael glasses daughter. How can our daughter be an animator? And they made it sound so impossible. You have to go into the school and you have to be able to draw the human form from all angles and in motion and animals, and it's really competitive, and we kind of just live here. We just sleep under the desk. And I never will forget that I heard this voice in my head that's I'm not good enough to do that. Who do you think you are? The dream was too big. To actually get away with something like that. So I was just reel it back, reel it back. You're just a little, you. And so I promptly gave up and felt ashamed of myself. But I loved teaching because I was a Girl Scout and I was working with the younger girls. And so I was you know what? I'm going to be a teacher because then I can inspire people and I can do art, but it's I have insurance and it's cool. So everything's according to plan. But then, of course, next stage. Supernatural aid, meet your mentor. So to me, my supernatural aid was my sketchbook, because I stopped making art for myself. A lot of us, when I was around that time, I sort of pushed my creative genius away, because I do think that every child is born with a genius, because in Roman times, it was a genie and it was a spirit, not a person. So it just means that you can hear something, you're sensitive to something that other people just don't notice. And so I pushed mine away, like a lot of people, in my effort to grow up. But I was, because also it just felt it's just so silly. Because also my genius is unpredictable. Sometimes he's really morbid. Sometimes he'd be really snarky. I didn't like to let him out. Shutting him away. But when I became a teacher, and I was so stressed out, because also this was, when I was getting my master's, it was 9/11 and Columbine. I'm what am I doing? Where do I fit into the world? And so that's when I sort of summoned my genius back out of desperation, because I needed to make art to help me deal. Because I knew that it was a resource there, and I knew that I couldn't let my pride just get in the way, who am I just oh, I just can't. It's no, if you're really desperate, that's when you sort of ask for help. So I started making really weird, dark, cathartic art, and started working in sketchbooks, and I just focused on making, you know, like 7 drawings every 2 weeks, just focus on the quantity, and the quality will come out. And I didn't realize it was my genie that I sort of was summoning back. I really thought that I was crazy. Like, I don't know where these ideas are coming from. I don't know what it means. I don't know what it's good for. And as an artist, it can be hard to create just for the sake of creating. We always know, what's this good for? Or can I sell this? Or what is, you know, what's the purpose of it? But thankfully, I just allowed myself to just create for therapy, for healing, just to get stuff out because I was drowning in myself. So, yeah, so my supernatural aid was my genius. And let's see. Then next we come to crossing the first threshold. So this top part of the hero's journey is the known world, which is for me, Virginia. And the unknown world is elsewhere. And I sort of, basically this divide between the known and unworld, I've always felt like that it's water. That's just something that has resonated with me, is my symbol for what it means. More props. We're going in the river. Static electricity. Okay, let's get this here. That's how I work with kids. Okay, so I feel like that when you do take the leap to actually not just do art just for shits and giggles, but actually really do it, it is like throwing yourself in a river and just hoping you're going to swim. And for me, it was, my sketchbooks basically swept me away, and so I left teaching, and I was here in Charlottesville for this part. In 1 year, I left my college boyfriend, I left the cute house we were living in, I left my job as a successful art teacher out in Louisa County, and moved into an old hotel room over on the corner, and got a retail job, and started just maniacally working on my sketchbooks, and started a mural painting business, and I don't know, just had my quarter-life crisis a little bit early, and hit the reset button. And it's hard to go off script because, well, everyone thinks you're crazy. Like, what are you doing? Throwing it all away? I don't know. Because for me, I didn't have like a clear dream. I just had this feeling that something was wrong or something could be better. I don't know. I can't explain it. So all I knew is that I had to try to make it as serious as possible. So I started doing shows for the first time. I started self-publishing my little sketchbooks and selling them at places like Plan 9. Oh, Plan 9. Oh, wait, no, we're still here. Posting my stuff on my blog online on MySpace, which the internet has, of course, eaten. And yeah, so I didn't know that I wanted to do graphic novels. All I knew is that I liked the format of a book. I liked the handheldness of it versus like fine art. You know, gallery was never where I fit in naturally, because people are like, oh, you do drawings. Oh. That would always be their reaction. It's so personal. Like, oh, how embarrassing. So I wanted to do something with books, but I didn't know what. Because I think a lot of people like chase your dream, and as though everyone has a clear dream, and most of us, we don't have a clear dream. So it might just be a hunch or a question, and that's enough. Because if you heard that, and you're like, heard a call, then yeah, that's what you're like, what is that? So it's really like a leap of faith, which is also why I didn't realize at the time, but oh, this is a spiritual journey. What? All right, so next, we venture into the unknown in the belly of the whale, which I just love the image of. And I have to say, and I made a note on the handout here that I stole the language from this from somebody else's teaching tool. It was the Royal Society of Account Planning. I have no idea who they are. I Googled them. I have no idea. But they did theirs like counterclockwise, and they didn't have like the river. Anyway, so I personalized. It's, reappropriated. So the belly of the whale represents the final separation from your known world and self. Oh yeah, I was supposed to read these, but you guys have handouts, so you can read. Basically, this is the stage where you actually commit to a metamorphosis. And I think this is hard for people as well, because you're sort of signing up to become something else. You don't know what you're going to be turned into. You don't know how you're going to be transformed. I compared it to, like, this part of the journey to sculpting myself in my apartment. And then this part of the journey is just sort of putting yourself out in the world like one of those giant Easter Island heads and letting the world sculpt you for a while. So that's how I compare, you know, that you sculpt you, but then you have to allow the world to turn you into what it needs you to be. So to figure out what I was good for, because in Charlottesville, people are like, oh, your art's good for something. We just don't know what, but it's good for something. So I decided in 2007 to make it a science experiment year, and I saved up money in my little apartment, you know, because we need to have a cushion if you're going to throw yourself out there. I'm not stupid. I decided that I was going to give up control of my life for a year and just plant a lot of seeds and see what happened and just embrace what came my way. And that one magical year, I taught art in different villages across Ghana and West Africa. And then I moved to Manhattan as an au pair for a family. And that was also the year that I first discovered graphic novels, which I was like, finally, a place where I belong. Because my art didn't fit in anywhere. It wasn't illustration, it wasn't like comic strips. Like graphic novels had not really made it to Virginia. And of course,
like Persepolis started coming out?
Yeah, so this was like the wave of like when people like Alison Bechdel were starting to get out there. So that they were like the first wave of like non-capes creators, as I call them. Because you got the capes dudes, you know, like, because in the 80s there was like a wave of like Watchmen and Mouse, and in the 90s it was just like nothing. Because it turns out it takes a long time to make a comic, so it takes like a while for people to sort of catch up. It was just manga, which, you know, it's never my cup of tea. So I discovered graphic novels and moved to New York, and that was also the year that I very serendipitously met someone where I got a job on these Christmas windows, where I ended up meeting a lot of my beloved New York Artners and learned a lot about, how to work with people. So the year that I decided to give up control was the most serendipitous year ever. So I decided I can trust this journey. Because when you throw yourself in, you do need to you need to cling to something has to go right. Otherwise, you're just going to turn back and quit. So for me, that, like, thankfully, it paid off. Also, because the family I lived with was the Bernstein family. I didn't know until we were moving in, because my mom grew up playing the violin. So I like, how come there are all these pictures of Leonard Bernstein around the apartment? Oh my God! So I called my mom. It's like, Mom, I'm like living with Leonard Bernstein's daughter. And that was the moment where my mom was like, suddenly I'd been blessed. Like, you're not a fuck up. Like, it's okay. It was kind of crazy. I had to like go to Africa and do all these crazy things, but then they started to brag like, oh, our daughter is taking chances. But at first it was like, we don't know what's happening. Why is she not teaching? Yeah. So it's interesting how the journey unfolds. So I learned to trust the journey, and I wasn't sure where it was taking me. It was like, I'm doing it. So, going, next phase, the road of trials, which is surprisingly fun. I feel like of all the steps of the journey, it sounds the worst, but it actually is like, I don't know, trials are not necessarily all terrible. Sure, you fail some of them. But for me, I can sum up the road of trials in 3 words: New York life. So I lived in New York for 7 years, and I just tried to do as much as possible and take advantage of this crazy random city, because I didn't know how long it would want to keep me. Because if New York doesn't want you anymore, it will let you know. Like, so at the beginning, it loved me. I was like, awesome, we'll see how long that lasts. So I just kept, because I'm an introvert, and I'm, practiced on being more outgoing and whatnot. So New York was a challenge to me to really come out of my shell, because you have to come out of your shell. The shells are broken because everyone's lives are just out in the open. So basically I just did all things I'd never done before. like pitching a graphic novel when I'd only read 4, or learning how to be a scenic painter. Like, sure, you can do this. Like, yeah, I could totally do that. Or learning production design, body painting, doing live art, bike riding, karaoke singing, street art, dating. Making comics, which was totally new, and lots of other things. And in the words of my mentor, Cole Welter over at JMU, he always said that New York is like grad school for life. So yeah, very much so. Okay, so next, meeting with the goddess. My goddess was Jamie Bernstein, who I sort of alluded to a minute ago, who is the mom of the family that I was an au pair for, because I couldn't have been able to spend my time on my art if I was working a million other jobs. So just having a place to stay made so much difference. And also, she was the first one to hand me a graphic novel, which was Fun Home, which is now a musical over at Live Arts. And Will and Wit is my graphic novel musical. So it's like, yeah, so it's crazy. So she's like my Medici, because I do think as creative people, we need helpers on the quest, and it is not to be underestimated. Like, we need people to, really like give us places to stay, give us opportunities to connect us, give us money, give us whatever, because the journey, we are sort of handing ourselves over to the world. It is like, I guess what Daniel Quinn would call like living in the hands of God. Like, you're just passing yourself, and you hope that the world will help you on your way. So she's my Medici. She's my New York mom. So the next step of our journey is temptation. Sorry, a little creepy. Yeah. I had 2 temptations. It's actually hard to write about this one, because it's like, oh no, I want to act like that everything always went according to plan. So my first temptation was academia, because when I wasn't sure if the books would work, I was meeting with schools about getting my doctorate, becoming a professor, which I feel like is still a possibility down the road. But I felt like at the time I need to stay in the wild to collect more data before getting domesticated. And the second temptation for me came later, which was motherhood. And because it did sound really appealing to sort of just put my books aside and focus on another quest, because motherhood is like a hero's quest all in itself. But I knew that I'd made a commitment already, and I had to follow it through. And also I had a chat with my ancestors, because my ancestors basically said that unfulfilled dreams passed on to me. It was passed on to my mom, it was passed on to her mom, it was passed on to her mom, and they basically said, girl, you gotta break this cycle. You're the first one that gets to do it, so yeah, don't give up now, you big baby. So I decided the cycle would stop with me, because after all, I feel like I have the privilege of a choice, so I made my choice, so don't give up. So now we get to this is the most unfun part. I brought a lantern, because it's like the super dark part, so you need like a little light. And of course, ironically, the Willamette musical is all about shining your light, because it's all archetypes. So this chapter, the atonement with the Father. This is when someone dies a physical death or a death of the self. Oh wait, no, that's good death. Person must confront and be initiated by whoever holds the ultimate power in their life, which is often like the father figure, because meeting with the goddess is sort of like the mother figure. So we're covering all the ground here. So for me, the clearest example was Charlie Kochman, who is the editor-in-chief of Abrams Comic Arts, because when I got my first book deal, he really wasn't sold on me at first, because I was this totally new person. I do comics in a weird way. And they were just sort of starting to do oh, girls like comics? Awesome! So I was just all sorts of question marks. And he said that he thought I needed an inker. And in comics, an inker is when someone basically, inks your book for you. So you draw it, but then they do the inking. And to me, that's the most fun. Writing is awful, but inking is the wee. And it was the first time that I felt myself in my head roar. No one is inking this book for me. It was like my Galadriel moment, roar. Because up at that point, I'd been such like, I'm lonely from Virginia and I just don't deserve to be here and I'm just not, I don't know. But I realized that if I didn't fight for myself, that it would be taken away. That it wasn't, that I had to at least pretend to believe in myself. Especially hanging out in comics, which is definitely more of a boys club. And so I decided that I needed to, check my sort of modest, like homespun, like Southern, like modesty, and be like, no, this is my project, and rah rah. And actually, we ended up like becoming much closer after that because I like established a boundary. But also, I felt like such a fraud in comics, and I had to be like, you know what, it's okay. My journey didn't come from it came. I'm a different sort of sequential storyteller, and it's okay. So yeah. Okay, next step, death and rebirth. Apostasis. So I do feel like that this journey is sort of a destructive, like to discover who you are on the inside is a destructive process. You're just like cracking the shell on the outside to reveal what's inside. And so this was like not very fun. I know it sounds like, oh, bliss and stuff, but it was more just like chaos. So for me, this was making my second book, Will and Wit, because that one I did more, it was less personal, it was more fictional, so I more just sort of like invited in all these characters and let them tell me what to do. And I sort of just got, I don't know, I became like a manic workaholic cliche, like working till midnight and not leaving my apartment and eating too little and drinking too much. And I just couldn't sleep. And I just sort of, I realized that the characters and the stories were something I was tapping into, and it was bigger than me. And so I just sort of gave into it and just let it consume me, because in comparison, I felt like I was nothing. I was just a vessel. And so I felt like that I was sort of this offering, like I was offering myself to them. I don't know, it was different. It made me sort of have trouble staying grounded in reality the more I sort of lived an altered state, you know, like talking like real world, like, oh God. So yeah, also that was sort of like after a bad breakup. So that was a tricky period. So next is The Ultimate Boon, which is fun, and the inspiration for this little activity over on the wall, which invites you to add what's at the end of your rainbow to our wall. Because the ultimate boon is the achievement of the goal of the quest. So to me, it was, basically I was 32, and I had published a graphic novel, and miraculously, it didn't suck. And I was actually nominated for an Eisner Award, which in the comics world is like the Oscars. And so my big crazy idea actually worked, which is like, you feel like you get away with something. So I was in California for the award ceremony, and I met up with my Artner, Lauren Larkin, because your Artner is your partner in art. And basically with her, I realized that there was a form of intimacy in my life that I hadn't a word for, Artnership. And I started to realize that the words we use for things actually change our reality. They're like, oh, this is a type of love. Like, I don't need a boy right now. I need like a creative love. So I felt like that I figured out this new thing that had always been there, and we decided we should do a musical. Yeah, we should do a musical. Which, remember back at the beginning, I had at the call to adventure, the spark, was being a Disney animator. And then, lo and behold, I made a graphic novel basically reads like a movie on paper, and now we were going to have songs to go with it. So it's like I had my dream come true. It was just a different shape totally than what I thought it would be. And actually it was a much better shape because I got to tell my stories my way. And I got to basically speak directly to my fellow clever, sensitive, beautiful weirdos to help them realize that they have a voice and that there's nothing wrong with them. Because if I was at a big studio, I'd be telling someone else's stories. And also, Disney ended up closing their hand-drawn animation studio, so I would have been totally screwed. Yay! Yay, comics! So I guess, so for me that was my ultimate boon, realizing that I was a visual storyteller, and that all the random ideas I had were stories. I just had to figure out how to put them together. Okay, okay. Next, the refusal to return, the suckiest part of the journey. I like the cat there. And this marks the beginning of the art in this show with the little rainbow over there with the black holes at the end. So I was sort of like, what's at the end of the rainbow? Nothing. There's nothing at the end. Yeah, this period, I remember I was like across the river from like Occupy and stuff. I was like, everything's down. Because I had found professional success, but I was very disillusioned with the fact that you can't actually make a living doing books. I was like, wait, what? I fought like so hard for this, and this is not, oh man. So it really broke my heart, because unfortunately comics take so much time to make, and publishers just don't have money to pay anything. So I basically ran out of plan, because I don't know, I didn't expect to get a book done, so I was just sort of like spinning in like a circle for a while. Like, okay, I did the thing, but now what do I do? And I don't have there aren't people in front of me to follow. Because when you're in like really uncharted territory, you run out of people to follow, because you have to be one to lead. But where are you going? So to me, I call this stage the implode or evolve moment, because you're basically down the rabbit hole. Because we're all like, oh yeah, go travel within yourself and figure things out, but how do you come back to reality? I feel like this is when we lose so many beautiful, wonderful creatives. Of course, I could rattle off a list of musicians off the top of my head. They create their like masterpiece, and then like we're too fragile for this world. And I didn't see hope in the future. And also I feel like we do romanticize it. So I decided I really didn't want to be I was like, I have to stop being the cliche artist. Well, I guess that's the next point, because this part is just like sadness. So I felt like I just didn't have any more fight left in me. Okay, so next step, magic flight, which is the road back. Also river, oh. This is basically deciding to come back, but you're not back yet. So for me, this was the point where I figured out that I was on the hero's journey, because I was so lost. I was like, okay, I'm a writer, yeah. I'm gonna look at my story, and I'm gonna like figure this out like a detective. Like, where am I gonna go next? So I looked at the path I had already walked, and that's when I realized that it was the hero's journey, which was like, oh, that's funny, because I'm living in like a windowless basement apartment in like Canarsie, Brooklyn, which is like, it's like 12-minute bike ride from the end of the L line. It's like way out there. It's like, why are you even here? So I was like, and writing a string of rejected book pitches, I was like, I'm a hero, yeah. But I did decide to listen, that the next step it said was go home. Because this is where basically your time in the unknown world, you're done. You don't have to hang out there anymore. Basically your job is now to go home and share what you discover. Because like something that I would notice, like when I was teaching in Ghana, for example, is that a lot of students, they'd go off to university in another country and they wouldn't come back. And they called it brain drain. Basically how all these people who were like their hope for the future were not coming home and helping them. And they were like, So I was like, I don't want to be brain drain. I should go home. And of course I resisted. I traveled around to the other Brooklyns to see like, oh, should I go to Portland? Should I go to Austin? Should I go to like Toronto and forget America? And I was like, no, I think, the mountains called. And I just felt like Virginia was where I needed to be back again with this round of musical chairs. So the rescue from without was what helped me, which was the moving into my parents' basement phase, which I don't know if anyone's done that before. But it's not, we can't even be embarrassed anymore because everyone's doing it. I was 34, and it was very humbling to live with my retired parents who next year celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. They're very cute. I ate a lot of my mom's cooking. We watched a lot of Poirot. I dug in the woods behind the house for like 6 months. Just because I needed to interact with nature again. So at this time it was, just recuperation and reconnecting with family, which, was actually perfect at the time. And then we come to crossing the return threshold. Final prop. Because this is sort of the actual returning part. So for me, the returning threshold was basically within a year of moving home, I had an emergency surgery because I had a mysterious mass in my intestines that, was going to kill me. And they're like, we don't know what caused this. And I was like, I know what caused this. This was my stress from years of overworking myself and just thinking that I was a robot and that there were no repercussions. And also I realized, I didn't even realize till then, but I had this secret shame, which I joked about when I was a kid, that I was crazy. Because I'd be like, I don't want to be an artist because they're crazy. It's because I really did, I didn't admit it on a conscious level, but on a deep subconscious level, I thought there was something wrong with me because I didn't hear anyone talk about a genius. Or, I don't know, people didn't talk about, they didn't construct a story that I could relate to and I could see myself in. And so I assumed that then there's something wrong with me, so just don't say anything, because then they'll figure it out, and they'll come after you, and I don't know, because difference is scary. Because I feel like that's part of the reason I also worked so hard was to make up for the secret shame. Like, I have to make up for the fact that there's this, darkness in me, so I'm just going to, do, the nth degree and be such a perfectionist and workaholic, because people really applaud that. They're like, you're working 10 hours a day? I'm working 12 hours a day. Yeah, you're so awesome. And so but when I realized that, oh, wait, there's this is real. And if I don't take care of my body, then it's going to kill me. And then I'm not crazy. And in a way, it's easier to think that you're crazy and think that the world's crazy. And so in a way, it meant growing up to sort of take responsibility for my body and also take responsibility for the visions that I have to fight for them. Because I felt a little of that earlier, these are bigger than me, I'm nothing. But now it was more, these are bigger than me, I have to be strong enough to bear them, to follow them through. So it was a different way of looking at it. And so for this chapter, it was a lot of self-care. Which I sort of see my self-care as my hero's training, because that's the stuff that I do to make me strong enough to be in this reality, and to deal with all the counter effects of, this lifestyle, because it is very vulnerable. So doing things like getting back into my mindful compassion practice, which I abandoned 10 years before, doing yoga and meditation. And admitting that I had pain in my wrist from all of my 10,000 hours, so now I do physical therapy. So to me, this was really when it sort of was oh yes, it's not about me, but not in a what was me way. More of a I have work to do sort of way. Okay, so then Master of Two Worlds, the next section. Da-da-da. And that's the section behind me. Because my art for a long time was, at first, for years, it was a little small figure in a vast landscape. And then for a while, it was more opposites. A lot of opposites, a lot of duality. But then over here, I felt things started to click where it was one picture, but I don't know, instead of two things opposed, it was two things more overlaid. So instead of a million doors open, they were all open, but within versus next to each other. I don't know, there was it was a shift. I was ooh, I don't know what's happening, but I like it. Because I always felt like a split personality with my inner world and my outer world, and I've drawn about it in books. As an introvert, I feel it's especially an issue because you are sort of your external persona and your internal self. And for me, I tried to unite myself by drawing it so I could sort of merge the two. It's I feel that we merge ourselves in different ways, because I grew up a blonde in a family of redheads, and I felt on the inside I was a redhead, so I just made myself a redhead so I matched my insides, and boom. So I feel that's part of the way that we have to change our reality, so there's not that, we were talking about dissonance before, because there's things aren't lining up how they should. So for me, this click moment happened when I was in San Antonio as a guest presenter at this event called Library Palooza. It was my first event after surgery, and I was feeling like I didn't deserve to be there because I was like rolling over to the school in this van with all the other authors, like, I've done like 30 books. I'm like, I've done 2. And I'm sitting next to James Dashner, who did like the Maze Runner books, and one had just been turned to a movie at this point. So I was like, I don't deserve to be here. But then we roll up to the school, and I see my handler for the day. And she's this little 12-year-old girl, a mini-me with red hair and purple glasses named Karen. And she was so excited to see me. She was just like, her and her friends like, and in that moment, this thing clicked to me. It was like, you cannot doubt yourself in front of this girl. You cannot do it because you are her role model, and you have to show her how to be awesome and brave and strong and funny and weird. And because also I saw Alison Bechdel give a talk once, and she was so hard on herself. It broke my heart because I just thought, because it's like you meet your idol. You're like, wait, you're not enjoying this? Is there no hope for me? Like if you don't feel confident, what hope is there for me to feel confident with this? And so I basically, like, Karen is the reason that I decided to just let myself actually accept her love, because her heart was so big on her sleeve. Her friend had done nail art, like based on like Will and Wit. I was like, oh my God, this is like amazing. And so I realized in that moment that I'm not just a vessel for ideas, I'm a vessel for love. I have to accept her love and give her love, and I have to be myself. And so that's when actually, it was the first time I really did like teaching in public again. And I realized like, oh wait, teaching is storytelling. Wait, what? This is all connected. But really it's because Karen, I could not say no to her. And so in that moment, I just actually let myself just, I don't know, shine that little light. And I was like, that was the moment I was a little star. And I like lit up like all her little friends. I was like, I was like, oh, this is what we're supposed to be doing. Because it's like about me, but not about me. So yeah, so that was my moment of like, oh, I'm here in reality and I'm authentically like my inner self on the outside, and it clicks, and yeah. And also connecting with my education side was really, oh my gosh, that was such a wound, because when I left education, it just left this hole of like, I abandoned you, and like, you know, like, but now then I saw that teaching through story was a whole other way of teaching. And also, like, it was just a different type of, I was just a different type of teacher. So coming back into education the past few years has been just awesome, because that was another area where I was very divided. Am I an artist? Am I a teacher? Am I an artist? Am I a teacher? Am I A or am I B? I think a lot of us deal with this. But our job is to find a way to be both. Like, I'm not A or B, I'm AB. Because we're creating the category that fits us. So we might not fit in one box, which is the struggle when we're young. Like, I don't see where I fit in, because our category is being carved out, like, right then. And, yeah, so for me, I felt like that by accessing my gifts as an artist allowed me to then awaken the gifts in my students in an authentic way that I couldn't have done when I was a 22-year-old. Like, I didn't know what I was doing. How could I, like, tell some kid to go pursue their dreams when I wasn't really pursuing my dreams? So yeah, so that was a nice bonus, like, yeah. I say, finally, freedom to live. Mastery leads to freedom from the fear of death, which is the freedom to live, and regarded as living in the moment. I feel like this is a nod to mindfulness, honestly. Like, the freedom to live is the freedom to be in the moment. You're not just obsessing about the past, obsessing about what your friends are doing, like, in someplace else through your phone, obsessing, like, future tripping about what things are going to go wrong, but actually, like, being with something like, oh, I'm actually here. I'm actually here. So to me, this chapter has just been, I've just sort of gotten a taste of it. There's only, like, one piece in the show that sort of touches on this at the end over there, where it's sort of like, oh, I'm finally see past my own nose, which is nice, because I'd rather make art about bigger things than, you know, like just the art that's like swimming in the turmoil. I mean, that was great and all. But I do feel like that like being in the moment, and a freedom of the spirit is what we're actually fighting for. So for me, this chapter was, selling, like basically selling this book and the new book that I'm working on right now with my publisher after a string of failed book pitches. Turns out when you're depressed, you don't make your best stuff. And I got out of my parents' basement and I came back to Charlottesville. Yay! And I do find it ironic that I'm talking about the hero's journey because I don't have things figured out. Like I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills while finishing this book. And I don't have everything figured out, but I've just gotten like a taste of it, which gave me like the confidence to even talk about this topic, because I don't have it all figured out. But I do feel like my art is telling me that my mind and my heart are open in a way that they weren't before. And so I'm not going to wait until I have it figured out to like talk about it. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to start talking about it. And I do think that the boon is sort of like the reason that we all embark on our journey, I want to publish a book, or I want to do this. But really the ultimate goal of the journey is the freedom to live, which I repeat, the freedom to live. And I think freedom is talked about a lot lately, because also people have different definitions of what freedom even means. But for me, it's, fighting to, tell the stories that I think need to be made and help fill the void of what is missing in our world. And also I think it's taking charge of our story in order to help influence the stories around us. Whether it's like, I'm on the inside, I'm blonde, outside I'm blonde, inside I'm red, I'll make this red. Or, creating a word like Artner, because I don't have a word to describe the intimacy I have with my creative partner. Or like I call my depression the matter, because I don't like the word depression. And I feel like that changing our story, changing the stories around us has a ripple effect. Because I do feel like I'm part of a bigger movement, because I think a lot of people are thinking about these same topics right now. And it's not about, I feel like we're all just vessels for the ideas, and the world's trying to redesign itself, just using us. So whatever crazy idea you have, it's not actually crazy, it's just the world wants it. So there'll probably have a whole bunch of people making books right now, just like mine. And I'm not like, oh, well, that's my idea. And if anything, I'm like, oh, let's be friends, yeah. We're drinking out of the same part of the well. So yeah, I feel like that's what we fight for. It's not money or glory, but it's just the freedom to actually live. Like, live a life that feels authentic and true and honest to ourselves. And, I wrote a quote down here. Thank you, past tense me. In the words of French philosopher Albert Camus, the only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. So I do think, little heroes, it is a little, shaking things up. But yeah, it's entering uncharted territory. So, okay. See, I have a couple things. I guess I had 2 topics I'll just go through real quick. First thing, advice for proceeding on your hero's journey. Let's see, 1, recognize where you are on the hero's journey. You might be in multiple places at the same time. It can be confusing. 2, access your helper arsenal, which could be your, Artners, it could be your family, it could be your ancestors, it could be fictional characters, it could be spirit animals. I feel like that the helper arsenal is actually very big, and we often don't ask for help. So yeah, enlist them, ask for help. 3, eliminate excuses, because we all have excuses. I don't know if it's time or space or confidence, but whatever it is, I'm sure that activate your logical brain to help you overcome it, because all I do is I'm not in the right place to break into books. Then go to where the books are. I don't know, it might be crazy, but I don't know, just give it a shot. And lift expectations, especially with timelines, because I feel like whatever deadline we set for ourselves, just double it, because things take longer. Don't compare yourself to other people, because we all sort of go in different orders. And also just being nice to ourselves, because we're so like, this is terrible. So lift all expectations, because if I kept my blinders on, I never would have even considered comics. Embrace mystery. John Hunter calls this the gift of not knowing, because I feel like there is a bravery in admitting that we don't know what we're doing all the time. And also, I don't know, it's keeping an open mind, because I do think right now we're looking, like I always tell this to young storytellers, that like all the stories have been told. I picture all the books in the world in the library, and I just imagine like 100 years ago, all the books that weren't there. Like there'd be no zombie apocalypse section, there'd be no graphic novel section. And I bet then people said all the stories have been told. So our job is to open our minds for what isn't, like what's between the books, like what's not there yet. And of course, keep learning, traveling and reading being my top favorite, because it's sort of also learning means you're open to change and letting yourself evolve, which is hard, because you don't know what you're signing up for. And of course, make a self-care plan, your heroes training. So for me, it's outlining my mental, emotional, physical needs, and also laying out my stress warning signs, with next to it my support system. So when you see these stress warning signs, reach out to your support system. And then you do you, because unfortunately on the hero's journey, other people's advice isn't always helpful. Sometimes you just gotta do it your own way and other people won't understand. So yeah, whatever, you're weird, because to me my instinct is like down here, like, so yeah, just do it your way. Oh yeah, floss, because we don't got dental. And make friends with patience and failure. Because, I mean, in my hero's journey, this was basically like, I don't know, this was like from like 12, it's like, it was a long time. It was probably like 12 years from like, I don't know, like entering to like here. So it's a long time. So yeah. And failure, because you fail all the time, you just keep going. You fail, something goes good, you keep going. You fail, you keep going. You just keep going, because you're on the path. You're just, you can't give up now. And another thing real quick is that there is another model. In case you're wondering what the hero's journey looks like in a practical sense, there is another model that overlaps perfectly with it, and it's the old German guild model from the Renaissance. Here, it's confusing. And it's weird, but it's exactly the same. So for this, you're basically an apprentice, like for a decade, and this is where you do learning in either academic school or real world school. And I always tell people if they don't want to go to real world school, you just got to get 3 things yourself for DIY school. Those 3 things are community, resources, and structure. So if you can impose those things on yourself and actively seek them out, you can do it yourself. Because also those are things that you do just in the real world too, like even just as a working creative. Like I need to tap into a community to have support. I need to take advantage of my resources and keep learning and stuff, and then also impose structure on myself. Otherwise, I won't get anything done. And then the journeyman period is the unknown world. And that's when you do your 10,000 hours. That's when you like travel and explore and do new things, and you collect skills while working for other people. So during that part of the journey for me, like I wasn't making like enough money from art to like pay for art, you know. Any money I got just went into my business. So like, oh, make stickers or take a class. But yeah, you're pretty much working for other people, but collecting skills. Like I need to understand marketing, or like understand graphic design, or understand how to communicate ideas with other people. And then the mastery phase overlaps with the return, because this is when people create their masterpieces, and also when you work more for yourself. And this is when you help the next group of apprentices, because once you start to get your stuff together, then you instantly help the next group. And yeah, so this is like the other, like the more logical, like practical, real world sort of look at that. And so, yeah, that's all the information I wanted to throw at you. So I'm curious if anyone has any questions. just threw a lot of things out there.
Quick question. At what point along the hero's journey did you get the name to put to it? So you say that you realized you were on the hero's journey around
It was the refusal of the return.
So that's when you heard of Juliet.
Yeah, I hit a wall, and started to look and realize and I was talking about it with other people, and that's when I got reflected back, oh, it's the hero's journey. And I was like, that's so cliche. It's but it's cliche for a reason, I guess. Yeah, and then I sort of forgot about it till I was working on the show. Because I was like, that's on paper. Because, it's just on paper. Versus, it's the real world.
The show Will and Wit, recently? The show being Will and Wit? The theatrical show? Or you said you were working on the show and you realized that
Oh, no.
Which show?
Oh.
This show.
This
art show.
Oh my god, are you serious?
Wow.
Well, because I thought about it here when I was like, what's it telling me then? If my life is on if a story, what's the next chapter? And it's oh, go home. So I just went home and then I sort of didn't think about it. But then I was laying out this artwork, and Earl saw because I had printed out pictures and I was laying them out and sort of organizing them. What's the narrative? Because it's mostly chronological. But it was oh, this blue stuff, and then it's gray stuff, and then it's sort of cracking, and then it's rainbow, and then it's out in space. What?
That's awesome.
Because this is how I make books. Is that I'll pick out the images and lay them out, and what story are they telling me? Oh, I have these multiple images with water. One of them is chaotic, and then it's still. Because a lot of times you draw about the same thing over and over if you don't realize it until you sort of hindsight, oh, I keep drawing about this I'm at this rock, and I'm trying to get into this rock, and every 5 years I draw about this rock. What am I telling myself?
Yes. You saying that just made me think about something for myself. It's oh my god, I keep doing that. Yeah, okay. That's so awesome.
I was going to add something. I do shamanic healing, and there's the medicine wheel. This is very much
This
like
also
the
matches
medicine
the
wheel.
medicine. Oh, I know. I wish.
And you're always somewhere on the medicine wheel, so you can do medicine wheel readings for people, and there's a positive and a negative aspect to each part of the medicine wheel. There's 12 stones, but there's 4 main ones. And
This is totally medicine wheel. It's
and
south.
the medicine wheel that I do, you start in the east, which is where you get your vision, and then you have to actualize it into the physical, and then when you move into the south, you're in the place of the heart. So you have to start walking the path of the heart, but then you have all these challenges like self-limiting beliefs, addictions, whatever. Before that, you're dealing with parent issues. And then the west is all about death and chaos, and you have to self-annihilate, and then there's a rebirthing. And when you get to the north, you're in the state of wisdom, and then the last 2 places before you return back fully is grace and compassion.
No, there's a lot of.
Similar. It's really amazing.
No, I love medicine wheel stuff because it's
Yeah.
also sort of embracing change.
Yeah.
Because I think it's hard for people to go from one section to another section.
Yeah.
So I find rituals very helpful.
Yeah.
And also just doing big dramatic things moving to a new place or just I don't know.
It's helpful also to know where you are. And
Yeah,
to know
it's a
where
bit
you're
like
going,
map.
know where you've been. Yeah.
I
it's like
definitely
a
feel
map.
less lost
Yeah.
when I have something like this or the medicine wheel to help navigate me because the traditional linear models, I don't see a place there.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It's similar in yoga as well. There's the stages of life that you go through with your age. So, and I found out about both kind of the yogic cycles and also the hero's journey when I was in the belly of the whale because similarly I was traveling and just trying to make sense of things. And when I found out about these 2 archetypal models, it really helped me put my life in perspective. And similar to you, growing up in Northern Virginia, nobody talked about any kind of circular path rather than a linear path. So I was oh, and I just felt and that's why I came tonight. So thanks for presenting this. Just feeling like the hero of your own story is very empowering.
And just taking charge of your story, because I think the word hero implies that you're really brave and outgoing and a spunky person, but I don't think anyone is brave at the beginning of the journey. I think that there's a humility that grounds you, and I feel like it helps you access your truth because you don't think that you're the bee's knees at the beginning. It's a humble journey. It's like a surrendering in a way.
And redefining what hero is, because people that show up every day, it's a lot more heroic than somebody shows up, like you said, for a rock star that has a year of their life that's maybe heroic and then isn't able to be present for the rest of their life. Like, there's that real heroism.
I think this is part of why the storytellers need to stand up and take charge of the stories, not just our own stories, actually be the hero of our stories, but actually take charge of the other stories that are defining our reality. Because I think it does make a difference, you know, because like as a woman, I think a lot about like how, like aging gracefully, I'm like, why do we call these crow's feet? These are my wings. They're obviously my wings. Like there's 7 little lines, like, and it's like, is this makeup? Makeup implies pretend, but no, it's my war paint, duh. Like, I feel like the stories that we tell and that we sculpt, like it changes everything. So as storytellers, like I don't do commissions for other people's ideas. I'm like, no, I'm fighting for my ideas. If you want to make your ideas, you make your ideas. Why else do I have them? So I think we need to stand up and also not tell so many, like, I understand the appeal of all the destructive stories, especially in YA. It's all just like super destructive. But we need to push past it and challenge ourselves to make things that find the hope and the beauty in it. That's our job. So I think that redefining what strength means is that vulnerability at the core and being, I don't know, having like emotions. But it's not just, I think the world is dealing with an identity crisis. So people, we might not think that our voice matters, but we're part of a movement.
Do you ever teach the hero's journey to your kids?
I haven't. This is the first time I've talked about it in public, so I was like, oh yeah. It's hard to look at one's life as a story.
It's so powerful. I was like tearing up at which part? I think you were talking about the kids.
Oh gosh, Karen.
And just realizing, that
well, yes.
it came full circle and just, how much you mean to young people.
I only realized working on this talk that my little heart was broken when I was like 13, when I decided that I was not good enough. And of course, I target like middle schoolers. I taught middle school. They're my favorite little group of weirdos to work with. They're so challenging, but it's such a vital age because that's where I feel like so many of them get off their path. Like, and of course, I make books that like target them. Like, oh, it's like so obvious, like why I do the things I do. Because I think we all sort of, our story is driven by almost like we're trying to right the wrongs in our past. I don't know. So other people will not have to follow in our footsteps that way, but they can learn from our mistakes.
More of a comment. I loved your talk. That wasn't the comment I had. Dr. Brene Brown, researcher, storyteller. There was a talk she did after the August 12th talking about Charlottesville, which she talked about the importance of owning your story. And if you don't own your story, you don't get to write the ending.
Yeah, it doesn't do anyone good when we're being the victims, does it, I suppose?
Well,
or like it's happening
that's
to us. It's like
how that might relate to August 12th. Just something about that.
Owning it,
Yeah.
Well, maybe it was events, in the past, like 6 months or so, this sort of feeling that I have to do something. We have to do something. Things are happening and people are putting down their cards, like playing their hands, and I feel like it's taken me a while to just get myself sort of emotionally solid, like in place. So then I can do, like, what do we do as artists? And the key is the stories. And also just the interpersonal, I feel, because storytellers were the ones that can create shared experiences. It humanizes each other. It's not just about the stuff on paper that's like pretty and fun. We're like mediators, So we can cross between all class lines and communicate and make people laugh, and they don't realize you're actually talking about something real. They're like, I made you laugh. Oh, Brene Brown's awesome.
Yeah.
Or do you want to say more? I believe what she was implying is that if we don't accept that racism and lack of equality is part of our story, really own that, then we don't get to write the happy ending that we want. To be able to live together in a peaceful, harmonious way. I think personally, and I've heard this from others, that it's up to white folk especially, I think, to really do racial profiling. I like to think of it that way, to look how can we relate, connect with people of color and embrace them and love them.
I always think about how I can empower the storytellers, because people often say things to me like, we need, I don't know, when you have access to the visions, people are always telling you what you're supposed to do, and so I just help you with the visions. But like, for example, people are like, there's a need for more Spanish language comics. You should do that. It's like, no, I'm not one to do that, but I want to empower some young people to tell their stories, because they should be telling those stories, like not me. So yeah, I'll do my part by trying to make characters that I don't see, characters to model how to be creative and how to work together, and different types of characters I don't see. Yeah, I definitely can't tell their stories for them. Because I feel like that the gifts we need, they have the gifts we need. So we just need to help them help them. So.
Would you have superheroes among your characters?
Like cape superheroes?
A wide variety of them. A lot of different potentials, a lot of different possibilities.
I feel like the emotional vulnerability, I feel like that's my superpower. I don't know. Well, to me, I guess it's illustrating the connection to the other world where the ideas are like, what's your question?
So when you were moving through the different phases, was it a conscious shift, or was it something that you just woke up one day and was like, I'm in a different place, or in a different stage?
Oh no, in the moment it doesn't feel like all logical and clean. Heavens no. Normally each chapter, it definitely wasn't like a clear divide between each chapter. It was more just like a period. Because also things in life, they just take a while. So when I moved to my parents' basement, I was like, I'll be here 6 months tops. Yeah, 2 years later. So yeah, I feel like that each chapter is sort of like, I don't know, it's like, I feel like each chapter it takes like 2 years. 2 years. 2 years. It's sort of my timing wise for something to get settled in it and then get ready to go to the next thing. Some longer, some shorter, because Because also I feel like there are also little sub-chapters in each one. So yeah, it doesn't make logical sense at the time. No, it's more after the fact that you have that wonderful hindsight. Any other questions? Thank you guys.